I am Eddie O'Sullivan, and this is This Week in the Second World War. In This Week in the Second World War, brought to you by the International Second World War Network. In 1939, on the 16th of September, the Saar Offensive ends with an unforced French withdrawal after operations failed to divert any German troops from Poland. On the 17th of September, the Soviet Union invades Poland from the east, and Poland's leadership flees to Romania. The Battle of Changsha begins the Second Sino-Japanese War. On the 18th of September, Lublin falls to the Germans. William Joyce begins making English-language propaganda broadcasts over German radio. He would earn the nickname Lord Haw-Haw. On the 19th of September, Hitler enters Danzig and gives a speech denouncing the Polish government and warns that Germany will never capitulate. And on the 21st of September, President Roosevelt makes a speech to Congress saying that the United States should amend its Neutrality Acts to allow countries fighting Germany to buy American weapons. In 1940, on the 15th of September, believing the RAF was nearing its breaking point, the Luftwaffe sends two waves of about 250 bombers each to attack London and surrounding areas. The RAF scatter many of the formations and shoot down 61 planes while losing 31 in return. Canada introduces conscription for men aged between 21 and 24. Hitler sends a letter to Francisco Franco asking for Germany to be granted naval bases in the Canary Islands and other places. Franco will reject the request a week later by asking for an excessive amount of compensation. Lieutenant Colonel Bernhard von Lossberg prepares the planned German invasion of the Soviet Union. On the 16th of September, Italian forces capture Sidi Barrani in Egypt. The Selective Training and Service Act of 1940 is enacted in the US. This is the first peacetime conscription in American history. On the 17th of September, Heinrich Himmler orders all Polish workers to wear a yellow badge marked with the letter P to distinguish themselves from Germans. And on the 21st of September, the British government officially approves the use of the London Underground as an air raid shelter. In 1941, on the 16th of September, Reza Shah abdicates and is replaced by his son, Mohammed, who rules Iran until 1979. Iran breaks diplomatic relations with Bulgaria, Hungary, Italy, and Romania. On the 17th of September, Great Britain and the Soviet Union set up a joint occupation of Iran. That day, Erich von Manstein takes command of the German 11th Army. On the 18th of September, the Soviet Union announces a conscription for men aged 16 to 50. On the 19th of September, the Germans capture Kiev and take 500,000 Red Army soldiers prisoner. And that day, Draža Mihailović and Joseph Broz Tito meet at Strukanik in Serbia in an attempt to reach an agreement to cooperate. No deal is reached. In 1942, on the 16th of September, German Army Group B penetrates the northwest suburbs of Stalingrad. That day, a B-24 Liberator attacks the U-156 submarine, while survivors rescued from the sinking of the RMS Laconia were on its foredeck. The U-boat was forced to dive and abandon the survivors. Karl Dönitz subsequently issued the Laconia order, forbidding any such rescue work in the future. On the 17th of September, the British war film In Which We Serve, directed by Noel Coward and David Lean, is released in the United Kingdom. On the 18th of September, British forces land on the east coast of Madagascar. On the 19th of September, the RAF raid Saarbrücken and Munich, but failed to do much damage. And on the 20th September, Allied commanders set the 8th of November as D-Day for Operation Torch. That day, Nazi authorities execute 116 people in Paris in retaliation for increasing attacks on German officers. Well, that's it. It's a roundup of events in the second week of September in 1939, 1940, 1941, 1942. 4 years, big changes. We'll be coming to look at the events in 1943, 44, 45 in the second week of September next. Quite a few talking points. Lord Haw-Haw, I'm sure that we can discuss that. And I was very interested in what's happening in Iran and Lebanon. But let's, I'm now going to invite our guest, regular guest, Joe Quinn, to join us.
Hello, Eddie.
Yeah, Joe, hi, great to see you. So, okay, let's go through some of those talking points. I know you want to talk about Battle of Britain Day because it's 15th of September here in England, and 15th of September is Battle of Britain Day. So it's quite a big moment in the memorialisation calendar. We don't talk about anything else, so we can go straight into Battle of Britain if you want. Any other topics that you want to review out of that list between 39 and 42?
Whatever takes your preference, Eddie. I'd let you make a handful of selections from those. Quite a lot of very interesting dates and quite a lot of events happening on this day or during this week. But the purpose of this live stream, obviously, we have moved it from our regular Tuesday slot just today to Monday to coincide with the 15th of September, albeit at short notice, because we felt that it would be a good thing to mark this particular day, given its significance within the anniversary calendar in the UK. And we're marking the 85th anniversary of basically a key day within the Battle of Britain campaign, where it became evident that RAF strategy had patently won out against the Luftwaffe. Now, this was not particularly surprising. The Luftwaffe had changed tactics on a number of occasions throughout the Battle of Britain campaign. They had originally started with Kanalkampf, bombing shipping targets in the English Channel and also port facilities as well at a later point. But in particular, they tried to take out the convoys. And the Royal Air Force were rather successful in terms of engaging attacking Luftwaffe formations. However, the losses on shipping were very clear, and there was a certain amount of attrition inflicted on the RAF. So what then happens is the opening of the aerial offensive on Britain on the 13th of August, known as Adler Tag. And Adler Tag basically is the initial strategy is to attack detection sites, RDF sites, detecting the incoming raiders from across the channel, and then attacking port facilities as well, and attacking, most importantly, RAF airfields, saturation bombing on key stations such as Manston, Kenley, Biggin Hill, various different other sites, particularly in number 11 group, which was responsible RAF's Fighter Command's section for defending the southeast and the approaches to London. But the RAF prove rather resilient in the face of the onslaught, and over time it becomes evident the Royal Air Force commanders begin to see a pattern in terms of the shift in tactics and also strategy on the part of the Luftwaffe, and they're able to break it into 3 different phases. The last phase, the most desperate phase, really symbolically comes to an end on the 15th of September, where it becomes very clear that the Luftwaffe aerial strategy is not working. And by this particular point, a few days after this particular date, around about the 18th of September, Operation Sea Lion, the planned land invasion or seaborne invasion and airborne invasion of the United Kingdom by the German military, is postponed indefinitely. And as we know, never actually comes off.
So the 15th, can I just ask this question, the 15th of September, because it's in the diary. Obviously, no single day constitutes a pivotal moment in anything. So what is your feeling in hindsight, and we're talking more than 80 years on, do you think there's it's overemphasized, it had been overemphasized, and there's a much more to the Battle of Britain, or was the 15th of September 1940 really was this moment when the fate of Britain was determined?
I think there were a few dates or a few periods within the Battle of Britain campaign that were decisive in determining the outcome of that particular campaign. For instance, from the 13th of August until the 18th of August, actually the 19th to be fair, the Luftwaffe actually were inflicting pretty crushing losses upon the Royal Air Force, not just in terms of material, but also in terms of manpower. They were attacking the airfields very concertedly, particularly in the southern sectors. Number 10 and number 11 group were responsible for safeguarding the airspace around the coast. And then you had number 12 essentially above the Thames, the River Thames, that being the natural boundary between number 11 group in the southeast and number 12 in the north, just to the north of London, around Cambridgeshire, Duxford, Debden, places like that, stations like that. And that's commanded by Trafford Leigh-Mallory, who will later take over RAF Fighter Command. But to answer your question, those 5 days between the 13th, the opening of the main, shall we say, the coup de main offensive on Britain and on southern England in order to wear down the RAF and actually destroy them in the air. This becomes pretty intense within those days. The losses become pretty intense. There's a lot of pilots lost in the lead up to the 18th. And actually on the 18th of August, which is known as the hardest day, the RAF take quite a lot of losses in terms of aircraft lost and also in terms of pilots lost. And that's the day that the last surviving Battle of Britain veteran who died this year on St. Patrick's Day, himself an Irishman, Group Captain John Hemingway, was engaged in battle alongside comrades from number 85 Squadron, attacking a incoming formation of Luftwaffe bombers coming up the Thames estuary towards London. So it was a pretty desperate time, and the RAF had to contend with a high rate of attrition. But over time, the Luftwaffe had to actually adapt its strategy. And then with the bombing of London and the beginning of the Blitz on London and the shift of strategy away from airfields towards targeting urban areas, particularly London, this gave the RAF breathing space. And what really happens on the 15th of September is that the Luftwaffe tried to throw the kitchen sink at the Royal Air Force, and it doesn't work. They send over two massive formations, and when the second formation goes over, 11 groups scramble their pilots and they attack the formations and they inflict so many losses, and then they wither away, and the bomber force keeps going towards London, and then they're hit with another wave of incoming RAF fighters from number 12 group, who hit them en masse and basically smash them up a little bit over the skies over London and break up their cohesion and the effectiveness of their saturation bombing campaign. And the Luftwaffe basically, it's not nearly as dramatic as that, but something psychically happened with German Air Force commanders, and both those that were leading the formations in the air and those that were planning strategy on the ground. They recognized that they couldn't really crack the Royal Air Force. They had reached a point where losses were absolutely unsustainable. The rate of attrition against the Luftwaffe was alone basically indicating to them that they really couldn't continue at this pace. And the pilots were experiencing fatigue. And it also leads the Air Force commanders to more or less tell their military counterparts that we really can't guarantee that we will have the airspace cleared over southern England. But also, I think it's a recognition, and this campaign continues really until the end of October in its intensity, and the Italian Air Force later get involved. But it's recognized by Axis air commanders that the Royal Air Force is not withering away. It's not dying on the ground. They keep thinking that they're breaking the Royal Air Force and breaking their morale and their resolve, and also wearing them down materially. But it's just not happening. Every day when they go over, the RAF meets them with stiffer resistance than the day before, and that's just the main reason why the 15th. It's a symbolic day because of the air operations that happen on that day, but it marks a turning point where there's a recognition by both sides that the RAF are not going to lose and the Luftwaffe are not going to win.
Yeah, the point is, I suppose, at this stage, never before in war had any ever been attempted to win a war purely by using air power. This was
Yeah.
an attempt to win by using air power, and I think again and again this idea that you can win using air power alone. I mean, some people would say, of course, the Tokyo, the Japan bombing of Japan was a very successful air projection of air power, but in most cases it didn't work. So the commanders on both sides are experimenting with the technology and systems which they are unfamiliar with. They couldn't, if you were on the Luftwaffe side, how could you come up with a strategic plan that would lead to an outcome when there's absolutely no experience? So I think presenting Goering as this blundering oaf, which is the way he's depicted in the film Battle of Britain with Michael Caine. Of course, I'm not trying to apologise for Goering, but he knew as little as anybody else. And of course, on the defensive side, it became evident, did it not, as the war proceeded, that the defensive capabilities against aerial bombing could be really incredibly formidable. Am I wrong, Matt?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the attrition that the rate of loss that the United States Army Air Force, particularly the 8th Air Force flying out of the UK, sustained in 1943 was absolutely, on some raids, they were sustaining like 30 to 35% losses. The famous, and this is depicted obviously in the series Masters of the Air, but the raid on the Regensburg raid in southern Germany, where they're bombing the Messerschmitt works in August 1943, almost 3 years after the events of the Battle of Britain. The effect of the constant hitting of them with massive waves of fighters and the very heavy anti-aircraft defenses over German cities or within German cities that are essentially peppering the skies with exploding shrapnel. The Americans, of course, are lacking effective long-range escorts at this point because they don't yet have an effective long-range, fighter interceptor, essentially, or fighter escort, developed at that particular point. They will later, the following year, they'll have the P-51 Mustang. So this shows the effectiveness of fighter escort. And one of the things when it comes to the Battle of Britain is that the Luftwaffe itself, it's got medium bombers, not long-range heavy bombers. It's got medium bombers. The heaviest bomber they have, and it's still a medium bomber, is the Heinkel 111, and that becomes the mainstay bomber for the German Luftwaffe for the remainder of the war. And they don't really develop another type of bomber that will actually deliver a strategic punch, whereas the British and the Americans do invest quite concertedly in developing a strategic air force. And this is the other point. Luftwaffe, when you compare them to other air forces, particularly the Allied air forces during the Second World War, the Allies developed strategic as well as tactical air forces to assist them in their war campaigns. Tactical to assist armies on the ground or in both the defensive and offensive capacity, and a strategic air force which occasionally lent assistance to the tactical effort on the battlefield. The point of the strategic air force is to attack the enemy countries, to hollow out their essentially their defense infrastructure, to basically demolish their factories, to bomb the urban areas where the workers who work in these factories where they live, to dehouse whole populations, which is what the RAF strategy ultimately was, and to destroy, in particular, big focus of the Americans was to destroy fuel plants, synthetic fuel plants, and to essentially make the supply of petrol and sort of fuel to the German war economy dry up. And then after that, ball bearings works, manufacturing plants, and all that. The level of advancement of aerial warfare, particularly in bombing campaigns by the Allies, by even the middle of the Second World War, was just on a scale that the Germans couldn't even comprehend. And let's not forget, obviously, that the Germans lacked effective fighter escort over British skies during the Battle of Britain for something that's the fabled reason that the escorting Messerschmitt 109s had only about 20 minutes of fuel before the red light went on their fuel gauge, and they had to turn back home, otherwise they wouldn't get home. But that's not to say they didn't have long-range escort. They did have ME 110 twin-engined fighters, which were capable of giving that kind of range. The thing about it is they weren't quite as effective as having Messerschmitt fighters. And the truth about it is that the Luftwaffe, and this is one of the reasons why the Luftwaffe were never going to win the Battle of Britain, was because the Luftwaffe, both its bomber force and its fighter force, was a tactical air force. It was designed for warfare on the continent, designed to support the armies on the ground, conquer continental countries, which is what it did very well. But it was, in terms of attacking Britain, that was the role of a more strategically engineered type air force with longer range bombers and certainly with longer range fighter escorts. And the Luftwaffe were, in some respects, completely unprepared for how well the RAF had rehearsed their strategy, which they had been developing for close on a decade.
Very good. Well, anyway, let's move on from the Battle of Britain. There's just one other topic I want to raise, a lighter topic, and then we'll go to 1943 to 45, In Which We Serve, which is one of the great films, British films ever made. And it produced and stars Noel Coward, who was based, I believe, I think he based it on his friend Louis Mountbatten, who was sunk in the Mediterranean. And so that's what inspired by. So Noel Coward is playing this very stiff British type, but it also has got a lot of it dwells a lot on the class structure. So the working class guy, John Mills, and his friend who dies. So they're going across the classes, and so film in the Second World War was right from the beginning. It was seen as being a really important means of boosting morale. I'm not wrong on that. Nobody was at the start of the war thinking, "Oh, we're just going to let Pinewood Studios and the British film industry continue to make the films that they want." The heavy hand of the state was involved in film production in the United Kingdom from the start of the war pretty comprehensively, was it not?
Well, In Which We Serve is still remembered as a sort of a very important cultural moment in the United Kingdom. And of course, Al Murray actually discussed this at length in one of his episodes, one of his weekly episodes with James Holland on We Have Ways of Making You Talk. And they discussed how the film In Which We Serve got made, and apparently the whole project, and everything, all the resources and everything ready to go, happened something quickly. This is a wartime efficiency for you. They got it together in about 100 days. You compare that to how long it takes to basically get a film from basically ideation until basically the point where it goes from pre-production into actual production. Would take sometimes 3 to 5 years in the case of most modern projects. It's almost impossible to get a film like that off the ground. And if you look at In Which We Serve today, it's actually really a remarkable film. It captures the era. This is one of the great things about it. It's got almost the viscerality of those 1950s war movies that we're all familiar with, such as The Cruel Sea, the Dam Busters, all these great movies that were produced in the 1950s, Malta Story, all of those. They're absolutely fantastic films, staples that a lot of us grew up on. But when you look at In Which We Serve, which is a movie that actually I wasn't as familiar with until recent years, and when I watched it from beginning to end, I consider the movie to be a masterpiece in some ways. You see the showcasing of newly arrived British talent. You've got Richard Attenborough involved as a young actor. You've got John Mills as well, who just the other day on BBC4, they were showing a rerun of an interview with John Mills when they were doing a life tribute to John Mills' acting career. And the story about how John Mills was cast in Which We Serve was it was insane, really. He was actually a serving Royal Navy sailor, I believe. And what happened was when he showed up for casting, he was wearing civvies. He wasn't wearing his service uniform. So he couldn't go home to get it in time. So he went and he essentially borrowed a sailor suit, which just about fitted him. And he reported back to the casting director or one of the casting producers foreign which we serve, and went in, and basically the guy took one look at him, and then suddenly he just basically said, "Oh, you actually do look like a sailor." Because originally he was turned away because apparently he didn't quite fit what they were looking for. And John Mills is cast. This is really a breakout role for him. He's cast in this role, and he's he plays one of the most well-known characters within In Which We Serve, who's the last sailor to say goodbye to the character played by Noel Coward when they are either on Malta, or I think it's
Alexandria,
Port Said or Alexandria, where after the ship has been sunk off Crete and the survivors have been recovered, all the sailors, all the crew, the surviving crew file past their old captain, and John Mills is the very last person, and he basically, "Good luck," and then it was like, "Goodbye, sir." So and you know all these lines like, "Don't be beastly to the Germans," and all these famous lines that sort of enter, British movie history. Yeah, it's a wonderful movie. And it captures quite a lot of tension, captures what's going on the home front, what's going on overseas, and it captures really the life of a Royal Navy destroyer crew in a way that I think was quite groundbreaking for the time.
I agree. And so if you can Google it, it's on, Google it, you'll find it, and you can watch it. And it really is a really amazing piece of film. Imagine it had been done in the middle of the war as well. Yes. So anyway, that's it for the moment. We'll be coming back. I'm just going to run another pre-record, which is going to cover the years 43 to 45, and we'll pick on one topic that we're going to talk. There's a lot to talk about. So anyway, here we go.
This week in the Second World War, brought to you by the International Second World War History Network. In 1943, on the 15th of September, the US unveils the bazooka, the first rocket-propelled grenade weapon, and Benito Mussolini is restored to leadership in northern Italy. On the 16th of September, 700 soldiers of Britain's 10 Corps in Salerno refuse postings to new units. The deportation begins of Italy's Jews the same day. Ho Chi Minh, who had been imprisoned in China for more than a year, is released. On the 17th of September, 500 members of the SS Croatian Division, mainly comprising Bosnian Muslims, mutiny at Villefranche de Rouergue in France. About 150 are killed, and several are court-martialed and executed. General Walter von Seydlitz-Kutzbach of the League of German Officers presents a plan for an army corps of 30,000 German prisoners to fight with the Red Army. On the 18th of September, Germany carries out Plan AXA, the military occupation of Italy, and evacuates more than 25,000 German soldiers from Sardinia to Corsica. The deportation begins of the Jews of Paris. On the 19th of September, the Markham and Ramu Valley Finisterre Range campaign begins in New Guinea. In Lebanon, Maronite Christian leader Bashar el-Khoury and Sunni Muslim politician Rid al-Soch agree the National Pact for a post-independence government. It calls for the president to be a Christian and the prime minister to be a Muslim. On the 20th of September, the deportation of Belgium's Jews begins. Allied forces launch midget submarine attacks on German warships based in Norway. And on the 21st of September, the massacre begins of 5,000 soldiers in Italy's Acqui division on Cefalonia. In 1944, on the 15th of September, the Lapland War begins between Germany and Finland. The Battle of Peleliu Island begins, and the French provisional government issues warrants for the arrests of Philippe Pétain and his cabinet. On the 16th of September, the Soviet Third Ukrainian Front occupies Sofia, Bulgaria's capital. The Second Quebec Conference ends. Danish workers strike in process at the transfer of Danish political prisoners to Germany. Hitler approves the Ardennes offensive. On the 17th of September, Operation Market Garden begins. 30,000 Dutch rail workers go on strike to paralyze the transport system in the Netherlands, and the RAF hits German battleship Tirpitz in Karlfjord in the north of Norway. On the 18th of September, Eindhoven is liberated by the 101st Airborne Division, and American bombers drop supplies for the Home Army in Warsaw. On the 19th of September, the Moscow Armistice ends the continuation war between Finland and the Soviet Union. Brest is captured, the Battle of Hurtgen Forest begins, and SS and police leader of Denmark, Gunther Panker, proclaims a state of emergency. On the 20th of September, Nijmegen is liberated. San Marino is occupied by the 8th Army and declares war against Germany the next day, and on the 21st of September, Rimini is captured by the Greek brigade in the 8th Army. In 1945, on the 16th of September, the Japanese garrison in Hong Kong surrenders. On the 17th of September, the trial of Belsen concentration camp guards begins. On the 19th of September, William Joyce is sentenced to death for treason at the Old Bailey in London. UK Prime Minister Clement Attlee, in a worldwide broadcast, promises independence for India at the earliest possible date, and on the 20th of September, German rocket engineers captured at the end of the war and brought to the United States begin work on the American rocket program.
Well, there you are, Joe. Lots of talking points there. So anything that you wish to make a comment about?
Yes, well, when it comes to 1943, the restoration of Benito Mussolini as the puppet leader of the Salo Republic, and it wasn't long after he had been rescued by Otto Skorzeny in that famous raid. Skorzeny's special forces, or his paratroopers, that basically made a glider landing in the mountains, and I can't remember exactly where, but it was basically he was held under house arrest under Italian jurisdiction, but like supported by the Allies. And it was a very daring, very audacious raid, and they managed to get him out in a Pfizer Storch that barely took off. It apparently hit a bump on a sort of, it took off from a hillside going downhill, hit a bump, and it nearly lurched forward and crashed head first. I mean, Mussolini could have actually been very easily killed during that in an abortive attempt to get him away from Italian and Allied custody. But his life was spared, and he was restored to the leadership of Italy and leadership of the Salo Republic in the north of Italy.
He became effectively a puppet, and he was powerless, a broken man, and it was run now. But then, of course, he got vectored into things that would doom him entirely, because he started unleashing his army and police against the Italian population, and that sealed his fate. So that's it's another part of the Italian agony. It's close to my heart, and you can see that with the 1945 as we move. Oh, Market Garden, of course, probably the best known battle in the Second World War due to a bridge too far, because Saving Private Ryan is it's Operation Overlord, but just one day. Effectively, what it's depicting is one day. Whereas the Bridge Too Far, which again with Richard Attenborough directing it, talking about continuity, and starring a whole host of stars, James Caan, Dirk Bogarde, etc., and it depicts this moment. It's still compelling viewing. So the Market Garden. I mean, you're not going to contradict the prevailing view, are you? That fundamentally it was strategically misconceived, tactically underpowered. I mean, lots of the tactical errors, like dropping the paratrooper so far away from Arnhem, and giving everybody too much to do, the road too narrow, underestimated the German opposition. You don't buy into the argument that some people make that, in fact, it was all down to James Gavin not being aggressive enough and pushing forward to get to Arnhem. So are you going to contradict the conventional wisdom, Joe?
Well, I remember reading. Obviously, I saw the film when I was, young kid, when I was in my early teens, and was very impressed by it. I was just going into my teens, and sort of my interest in the Second World War had really just sort of reached a blossoming phase. But I read Cornelius Ryan's A Bridge Too Far when I was in school. And one of the things that occurred to me, and obviously it's a great drama, a lot of personal stories, characters that I would later come across, later interview. In fact, I interviewed Sir John Gorman, who won the Military Cross for ramming a German King Tiger tank and taking it out with his Sherman Firefly tank, which was given because he was an Irish Guardsman in 2nd Battalion Irish Guards, an armoured unit in Guards Armoured Brigade, which was in 30 Corps. And they were basically very much in the lead, and 30 Corps were involved in they were the key army formation in terms of driving up this narrow road linking, this causeway linking all the airborne zones that were involved in the Market Garden Plan. Well, John Gorman essentially took out this King Tiger tank with his tank, which was called Ballyragget, which is a village in County Kilkenny that very few people probably would have heard of. But I do remember having read the book and having read after that, I Was a Stranger, which was the memoir written by Brigadier General Sir John Hackett, who was one of the commanders and one of the people that gets quite a lot of flack for the underwhelming performance of certain British brigades that were involved in the Arnhem end of Operation Market Garden. I remember thinking that there were too many moving parts. This was a very, very highly complex operation. It was one that was going very deep into Axis territory, and it was affecting some very vulnerable zones. And there was too much of a possibility of the Germans being able to rapidly reinforce certain garrisons in certain areas. There was too little known about German formation movements, and also bearing in mind the fact that there had been a wholesale collapse of the German front in France and a massive retreat that had ensued. And a lot of chaos was going on, sort of in the German rear. And I think the Allies made an assumption that if they were to launch the operation at that particular moment, and this operation, when it was originally conceived, they were planning on only just using one division, which was British 1st Airborne Division. And they eventually built it up. I think it was Comet originally, and then they basically built it up from that to involve both American airborne divisions and to make it the largest airborne operation ever attempted up until that point. But the thing about it is that the plan was very ambitious, and it called just for the use of a lot of airborne elements, a lot of units that were held in reserve. And I believe it was a very highly ambitious last-ditch attempt to just have a knock at a crack at Nazi Germany and see if they could crash their defenses in the West before the onset of winter and Christmas, because they knew immediately that the conditions were going to get bad. They were worried about getting entrenched, and also they were running low on fuel and other supplies. They had enough for one last major push in one theater or another. They had to make a decision. And there was also a very important strategic imperative. The rocket sites were located primarily in the Netherlands. They were also located in northwest Germany, but they were in the Netherlands, and there was a massive political imperative to invade Holland in order to silence those V2 rocket sites. So there's a lot of things going on here, there's politics, whatever, but perhaps a very ambitious and perhaps very worthy plan that was ultimately, unfortunately, poorly executed, could have come off better. Its chances of success, in my view, certainly, and I remember thinking that when I first read about it, were probably limited at best.
I'm a bit of a student of the Sicily campaign, and of course the famous Promissoli Bridge operation, which prefigured in so many ways the things that went wrong in Arnhem. So the airborne, and they were glide troops who were landed. The whole idea was they were going to hold the bridge, which is going to get them to Catania, for about 12 hours, and then the infantry would arrive. Same thing. It was scattered all over the place, couldn't concentrate. They didn't have intelligence about the fact that the German paratroopers were landing. And then it took the land troops much longer to get there than they thought. And so But Arnhem is that kind of problem repeated on scale. Now, if you look from the German point of view, Hitler, after Crete, did he not order? He said, we don't want any more of these airborne operations, with this ambitious dropping troops behind lines. And the parachute divisions we used from there on as basically they were ground troops. They were hardly ever used in paratroop drops. And yet that we had, the Arnhem operation. And the extraordinary part about it is John Frost, of course, who's played by Anthony Hopkins in the film, Bring Up the Pier. John Frost, he was involved in the first Allied airborne fiasco, which was in Tunisia, in which he was temporarily taken prisoner. So, it seemed, there was still an attachment, was there not? And the romance, I think, was there not a view in the romance, or maybe it was Montgomery overcompensated in believing that these special troops, trained, fit, would drop them behind the lines and they could do everything. But it's something that the Germans didn't attempt. Why did the Allies, couldn't they have learned from what happened in Sicily?
Like so many aspects of warfare during the Second World War, airborne warfare, as in the dropping of airborne infantry and other units behind enemy lines and the conducting of operations, in some cases deep into enemy territory, later to be supported by conventional ground forces. This was a relatively new form of warfare. Actually, the one of the first originators of this warfare long before the 20th century was actually Benjamin Franklin, who famously wrote, "Where is the prince that could defend against a force where 10,000 were dropped into his rear from the sky?" So Benjamin Franklin foresaw the possibility and certainly the promise of potential airborne warfare in the future. And I think probably there might have been other antecedents about the theory of it as well. But this was something, it was like it had gone from theory into practice in a very short span. And there had been some successful airborne operations. John Frost, bear in mind, had also taken part in the Bruneville raid, and that was an airborne landing that basically was later supported by they were relieved by Royal Navy forces and some Royal Marine detachments that were involved in that took them off the coastline. And this was basically designed this raid, the whole purpose of it was to take out a military objective on the coastline and to raid this new radar technology and to extract it and get it out of German-occupied territory. And that had been a very successful raid, and it showed the promise of airborne warfare. So John Frost is very much involved in sort of a pioneering airborne operation of that particular kind. There have been many airborne operations throughout the war that were relatively successful, and it must be remembered that ultimately, in spite of the fact that the D-Day, the Operation Overlord, the airborne element of that operation, even though Allied paratroopers were scattered to the four winds, really, particularly in the Kototan Peninsula. They're at the 82nd and the 101st got completely jumbled up, and in some cases were many miles away from their drop zones and their gliders landing in places completely different to their original designated LZs landing zones. The incoherent, disorganized nature of it actually added to the confusion that the Germans were feeling, and the fact that they were so well trained and were so focused on their objectives, and there was a do or die attitude to their objectives, particularly in the first few days, meant that they were given the element of surprise, and that meant that form of warfare was able to come off quite successfully from an Allied vantage point, and many airborne units did succeed in taking their objectives, and it was the case with the British 6th Airborne Division over towards the east, on the eastern side of the Allied bridgehead on D-Day +1 and D-Day +2. But to answer your question more concertedly, when we relate this to Market Garden, given the fact that this has been tried but not thoroughly tested, and given the fact that operations are getting bigger and bigger, and obviously there are a lot of losses, they're bringing in replacements, and they're bringing also a new Airborne Division online as well. I think the American 17th Airborne Division, which later takes part in Operation Varsity, which is another British operation that a British-led operation that takes place when they cross the Rhine, and they use British 6th Airborne, which has been replenished with new. They've taken an awful lot of losses, a terrible knocking in the Normandy campaign, and they get reinforced by replacements and new units, and they take part in this operation. And Varsity is the last major airborne operation of the war, and that takes place anywhere in the world, and is actually, all told, apart from a few mishaps here and there, massively successful. Yeah, and it's a footnote in history, really.
Yeah, just one final observation on the film, because Sean Connery, which is Roy Urquhart, and this is true. I mean, he was commander of the division, and he had never done a parachute jump before. And Roy Urquhart, he had previously served as a brigadier in the Malta Brigade in Sicily, and apparently he was Montgomery was a big fan of him, and that's one of the reasons why you think, well, why would somebody who's never actually done a parachute job be put on the command of the largest airborne operation, almost must be in world history? But there you are. But Sean Connery was, acted the part and in the end survived. Look, I'll tell you what I'm going to talk about now, Joe, and don't go away. I want to talk about, I seem to have, no, I don't. Let's see what I can do here. Yes. I want to talk about what happened this week in Salerno. This photograph was taken on the 9th of September in Salerno, in Paestum, which is south of Salerno, but it was to mark Day 1 Operation Avalanche. And what you see here is the mayor with the sash on the right. You can see the man in the suit is a consul general from Naples. We have two generals, American generals, including General Brad Carter. And the gentleman in the red waistcoat is actually a representative of the Chickasaw Nation of the United States. So this monument is they're laying the foundations for a monument to mark the landing spot of the 45th U.S. Division, which was involved in Sicily, and Salerno, Anzio, then Anvil or Dragoon, and then eventually finished up entering Germany and liberated the concentration camp in Dachau. And one of the characteristics of the 45th, called the Thunderbird Division, is that it was based in the southwest of the United States. And what it recruited very heavily from Native Americans, because it was Oklahoma and Arizona. So in the 45th Division, the Thunderbird Division, there were 50 Native American tribes represented. I think it had the largest representation of Native American tribes from the southwest, the Apache and Navajo and others.
It's extraordinary.
Sorry?
It's extraordinary, really, actually, the level of diversity.
Exactly. And it wasn't segregated. The Japanese Americans were segregated, but the Native Americans weren't. But they were highly represented in the 45th. And so the Chickasaw Nation of today has decided to finance the construction of a monument in Paestum, which is going to go right next door to the 36th Division, the 36th Texas Division, T-Patches, and on Paestum to mark the contribution avalanche. And they're calling it the start of the Thunderbird Trail. So the Thunderbird Division, the 45th, is setting up a trail that you'll be able to follow. The first one is Salerno, but it will go up to Venafro near Cassino, Anzio, and then it'll go over to south of France, and it's going to finish up in Munich. It's a very big project. And I think if anybody's interested in knowing more about it, I can help you be in touch with that. And it's a really extraordinary initiative. And I think it's evidence of how dynamic the Second World War history community is. Here we are, and we're talking about the 82nd anniversary of Salerno now. And the new monument is going up, and a new initiative is being started with the Oklahoma State University behind it. So there's an amazing number of things that are happening, and I will try and keep you posted. Anyway, what do you think of that then, Joe? Do you think is that the impression you have? There's a lot of life in the Second World War history community?
Absolutely. It's getting more and more prolific, to be honest. And you have lots of creative projects, lots of commemorative initiatives, growing in strength, just because the last round of anniversaries, which obviously, when you begin at a particular decade, when you start with the 80th or so on and so forth, and it goes to the the 80th anniversary of 1939, 1940 until 45, and then you have to wait another 5 years for the next round, doesn't mean that the energy dissipates. One has to remember that the movie Dunkirk came out in 2017 to great aplomb right across the country. It didn't need an anniversary to accompany its release. The interest will continue, and this energy is going to continue, and it's going to get stronger and stronger right up until the centenary. What will change, I suppose, is the fact that we're at the point, and this is why we're in a very poignant, special moment, that we're just at the point where the sun is setting in terms of the living memory of the Second World War. We have very few eyewitnesses left, which is probably another reason why we need to sort of lend this initiative towards capturing some of those stories or voices, and indeed also the stories of those who've passed on.
Exactly. Well, Joe, thank you very much. You're doing your bit. Thank you so much. Been another fascinating session. So I'm going to say goodbye, Joe. Let me just say a few final words. So that was a really great episode covering the second week in the Second World War. So many things that were there and we didn't discuss, but we will come back to them, the themes. Obviously, today in Britain, the Battle of Britain Day, hats off to the young men and women who played such an important role in this pivotal moment in British history, world history. And quite rightly, Britain is very proud of the flyers and everybody supported in this moment. And it was a national experience to a great extent. My mother was living in London and she could look up and see the contrails, the trails of the fights taking place over the southeast of England. And so many people were affected by that directly, as well as the bombing. So anyway, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week, in a week's time, roughly, with another episode of This Week in the Second World War. So from everybody here, it's goodbye, good luck, and may God bless you all.